evening all. As part of Industry Connect event, today we have Ankit Rawal, who is with Inmobi sales team. He leads Inmobi sales function for emerging markets, including India, Southeast Asia, China, Korea, and he was leading the sales team for African countries earlier. Prior to mobile advertising area, he moved on. He was a developer with Microsoft, Oracle, and he had a short sales stint at SAP Labs. He is a master's degree holder from SPJ. He prides being a mobile evangelist in the rapidly growing advertising industry, and is a digital enthusiast, avid marathon runner, is learning Mandarin, and he professes digital advertising in many educational institutes. Thank you for coming. You can take the word.
Hello. Yeah. Is it audible? Perfect. Cool. So, as Vaibhav and others mentioned, I've been doing sales at Inmobi. It's been more than 5 years. The company is around 6.5 years old. How many of you know what Inmobi is all about? Good chunk of people know. That's good. Anybody wants to take a shot what we do? Yeah.
So Inmobi is in mobile advertising. Basically, like they compete with likes of Google and Facebook in mobile advertising phenomena. So now a lot of things are happening in mobile. A lot of data is generating. So based on that, one personalized advertisement, so Inmobi is working on it.
Right. So that's a very technical answer. If the very simple answer is, if you read news on an NDTV app or Times of India, if you are playing Angry Birds and a pop-up ad comes into picture, now I am faced to abuse to. It is me and my company who's putting those ads. So that's what we are basically doing in your gameplay, in your time we are trying to put ads. But the whole endeavor is to how to make the whole advertising experience much more engaging. Today advertising, if you see whether it is on TV, newspaper, is much more intrusive and interactive. You are trying to consume some content and pop an ad. So our company and companies in our space like Google, Facebook are trying to make the whole experience much more engaging. Also, we are trying to work on how can we make the whole ad experience very, very well targeted. See, today I am sure when you are reading news, a very irrelevant ad comes into picture. So companies like ours are trying to make the whole process so narrow targeted that something which you like, something which you is what are passionate about. If I show the ad for it, the chances of you clicking on it and taking action is much higher. So in some sense, Inmobi is a part art, part science company. But tongue in cheek, this is what we as sales people do, or what different people think we are doing. So that's what I want to really talk about, the whole sales. So what's the agenda today? Yeah, so what's that? That's what I'm going to talk about today. We'll talk about how sales has really evolved in the last few years, in fact last few decades. We'll talk a little bit about sales models, what are various kinds of sales model happens. We'll talk a little bit about what are the various sales KPIs one has to really focus on. And then of course I'll share a lot of experience about Inmobi and how we really ventured in some of these emerging markets. A disclosure, I have worked in some of these markets. These markets I have not personally worked, but of course I have teams and I have my colleagues who have been working, so sharing some examples. And last but not the least, like it or not, all of us, whether we are in product engineering, are a salesman. If you are not selling a product or a service, I am selling an idea, I am selling a particular candidate, or I am selling myself in an interview. So these are some of my learnings of what are the good traits of a good salesman. So this is very interesting. See, from the industrial revolution till say the factories of this millennium, sales was a very easy job. There was a lot of pent-up demand for any product. I'm sure you have heard that quote from Henry Ford: "You can buy any car as long as it is black." because there was so much demand, and the sales job was very simple. You just get the buyer's attention, tell him this product, take the order, and you are done. This was exactly how sales had been in the product or in the industry world. So anyone who could make as many cold calls, who can go bash the door, hit and run, was a good salesman. The more cold calls I do, the more number of people I reach out to, I can become a good salesman. In fact, there's a very interesting Hollywood movie called Glenn Ross, a 1992 movie, which exactly talks about this is how a salesperson is. So they profile a few sales guys, and anybody who's making those lot of number of calls was a good salesman. But of course, with the whole environment changing, technology increasing, geography becoming history, 24/7 availability, the power started moving from the sellers to the buyers. So sales also started evolving. It was no more about one product, but it was more of a solution. Solution is nothing but the core product you are trying to sell, irrespective of which industry you are talking about. I am not even talking about IT. This is also true for an FMCG space, for example. And you are trying to sell a host of services around it. So it was all about understanding your customer needs. You empathize with what are their requirements, what are their challenges. You understand which ecosystem they operate in. Then, of course, you understand what is their financial outstanding, as in how much money do they have to really invest in your solution. You work with different people within the organization, because in any sale, I'll talk a little bit about it, you have 3 or 4 different people. You have an economic buyers, people who really will pay for that, which is the CFO kind of organization. Then you have typically the end user who will use your product. So if I'm trying to sell a banking solution, these are people who are on the floor who will be using the solutions. There will be a lot of technical people, typically the gatekeepers whose yes doesn't matter, but no matter. So if he or she says, no, this solution is compatible with my current solution, you can't sell that solution. So you start engaging with a lot of different sales people. You start thinking of how do you do that whole funnel. So in sales, typically there's a funnel of where you go, you first prospect the client, then you qualify them, then you generate leads of them, then you figure out how do I do the lead priority, then you go and do some proof of concept, then you finally have objections, you try to handle that, and then finally you do the sale. So this is how exactly, if you see, the whole process of selling products has really evolved to a solution selling, and that's why sales skills, sales people, sales knowledge has become much more important. So no longer you can sell any car as black. You really have to understand what the user and really understand their unique requirement, because niche is the new mass. Because I'm sure if you work in a product sales requirement, they'll say my system is different, my requirements are different, so one has to really customize and do that. So that is actually what the whole transition from product to solutions. Another interesting thing which has happened is when we think of sales, we just think of one particular set of people, like somebody coming to your door and trying to sell something, which is still very relevant, and this is what we call as the direct sales team. So in any company, you have people who go meet the customers, tries to sell them. They are called the direct sales team. Then a new set of sales skills are required when you become an inside sales team. Any idea what is an inside sales team?
They help in customer penetration. Account penetration is their job.
Selling inside the organization.
Correct. So see, typically sales guys go and meet the customers. And inside sales team largely don't go and meet the customer. He just calls them. So he's either calling them on a phone, or he's on a Skype, or he's on an email, but he will directly not go and meet the customer. So they are typically the inside sales people. So for example, Google and Facebook has humongous amount of sales people now in Inmobi, where we are trying to reach to our customers over phone, over email, over Skype. So you really don't go and meet the customer. Then in fact, in some of the more evolved product organizations, you really don't need the salesperson to meet the customer. The customer himself will come on his own, look for his product, do his kind of what he's looking at, and he then goes and buys. A classic example is, say for example, Flipkart, right? I don't have to go and find a customer. The customer comes, understands which SKU he or she wants to buy, and then go ahead and buys the product. So it's completely driven by platform. There's no salesperson who comes into the picture. And last but not least is the resellers kind of model, which is very true in a B2B environment. Like you have your own channel sales. For example, Microsoft today has humongous partners who sell various Microsoft products. And because Microsoft can't be in the length and breadth of the country, they work with these channel partners who basically sell on their behalf. So in any organization, depending upon where they are in the maturity, you will try to work across all the 4 various models. So if you are a small company, of course your focus would be here, but as you try to scale, as you try to control your costs, you will try to come from this model to this model. Of course, there are tons of challenges in each of these models, but this is how sales has also evolved. So in a lot of countries, a lot of companies, like for example Cisco, somebody I met, they have a strong inside sales team. They have a strong reseller team because they can't reach out to every geography, every country. Facebook, for example, has a very strong presence on the online side. Facebook today has more than 1 million customers. Now, sales people of Facebook will not reach every customer. The whole user who wants to advertise on Facebook comes on the platform, chooses his targeting, gives the budgets, run the campaign, gets its ROI. So it's all on the platform, and this is where it becomes very, very profitable for the company. And if you've been following these tech companies, gross margins are anywhere between 50% plus. In fact, there's a very interesting saying in this movie, Forrest Gump, that you don't make money from whales and sharks, you make money from shrimps. So, if you really want to make money, the way you make money in any business is through the long tail. You really don't make money a lot from the big guys. You make a lot of money. In fact, gross margin, not a top line, but the margins really come from the shrimps, as I said. So, a lot of companies try to want to do these kind of things. Again, it depends on each ecosystem where you are, what you're trying to do. In a more B2C environment, this is what are profitable at. That's why you have Flipkart, that's why you have Facebook, which try to do this kind of model. Any questions, doubts, observations?
I think reseller and channel sales, it's not only, it depends on the ecosystem, what kind of targeted customer they are targeting. Like Oracle and they are more in products, software selling and IT selling kind of things, product solutions. So they cannot, because that is why they target, they make partnership with companies like Wipro and others. In fact, Apple like companies, they are all have resellers like Ingram Micro. They are the reseller, right?
So yes and no. See, the other way to look at it is, suppose, and this is exactly what happened with Inmobi. When we were trying to expand outside India, I did not have the money to really say hire people on ground. So when I was trying to go into say Russia, I did not have the expertise, neither did I have the language barrier was there, of course. So what I did is that I have the technology, which is my IP, which is difficult to copy. A local guy there would have the understanding of the market, he would understand the bureaucracy, he will have the language. So I partner with him. So he becomes a reseller for me. So I bring the technology, he brings the relationships, and we are able to do business. So it is very true for companies in a B2C space, but in a B2B space also, this is a very good way to expand into many geographies. Where I bring the technology, somebody brings the local sales, and you start doing business with them. So yes and no, very true, start with B2B environment, but it can also work in such scenarios. Another interesting thing is when we think of sales, we think very unilaterally, you have to go sell, sell, sell. But what we not realize is that you can actually get it is 10 times more easier to sell to an existing customer than to a new customer. So a lot of focus in companies these days is how can you increase your share of wallet of a particular customer. So if I am getting 5% of business, what will it take to get to say 10%, 20%, 50%? So if you see in any sales organization, we call them hunter and farmers. At least in our organization or say in a Google organization, we call them hunters and farmers. Hunters are guys basically who really go and get new customers. So they are the ones who crack new customers. So some of the KPIs you would look at them is how many meetings they are doing per week, what kind of proposals are they getting, what kind of leads, and then you can have a whole funnel of the leads. So lead generation, qualification, what is the sales lead cycle they are, is it just in the beginning, are they closure and all those things. So these are some of the metrics you would really look for a sales hunter. On the other side, you have someone like farmers, which parlance you use is account managers, you can say people who are trying to upsell and cross-sell. So how many times can I keep getting repeat POs or purchase orders in our business or any order system where you have, we call it IO in our mechanism. How can you get more IOs in the same unit of time? How can you increase the average ticket size of a particular PO? Or can you sell them if you have 2-3 products, if they are buying one category of products, can you sell them other category of products? So it is very, very important that sales people are very number driven And that's why I said in God we trust, for everything else we need data. So sales, as sales organizations are maturing, it is not just about relationship. See, typically you say sales is all about relationship. If you have the right relationship, you are able to sell, which is not the case. As sales processes are evolving, it is a lot about data, it is a lot about some of these metrics you measure, and then only you are able to improve your sales process. So this is what largely is happening in the sales organization, and different companies, product companies or services companies are at different evolutions. For example, now sales is a lot about RFPs. If in the system integrator space, Infosys, TCS, Wipro, they get a lot of RFPs and they respond to a lot of RFPs. In a product space, it is more about if you are sending some user licenses, so how many ULAs have you sent, end user license agreement in an SAP or IBM kind of thing. In our parlance, it is more about how many more advertising campaigns I am able to sell. So, like for example, in my team, I have these kind of hunters and farmers. Hunters are typically trying to crack new verticals. Today, if I am selling to an automobile, can I start selling to a PNG or a CPG kind of company? And there are other set of people that if I am getting already business from say Unilever, if I am getting 5% of it, can I start getting 7%, 10% of it? So that's the kind of sales KPIs we really look after in sales. Cool. So that's largely I just wanted to talk about this, but the real interest I really wanted to talk about was how I've been able to do sales across so many different geographies and what are some of these experiences I would want to share. So let's start. Of course, this is a classic case, right? That when I'm making a product, which country should I go? What should be the criteria should I choose? Should I go into Asia? Should I go into Africa? Should I go into Europe, Western market? And a lot of us are perplexed in those kind of situations. But thankfully today, because of technology, and I was saying geography is history now, you can make a product, you can develop locally, and you can earn globally. Cases like Uber, for example. Uber is a company. If you, I remember that I was not part of it, but one of my founders was one of those their Google Ventures funded company, and he was one of the panels, and he was joking to us after that that as a taxi aggregation company, will it even succeed? We have been doing this, will not succeed, and within 3 years, if you see the valuation of that company, is $17 billion, if not more. So, and they developed locally and they have expanded globally. And there are similar such companies. And you've heard about Airbnb, which is a similar aggregation marketplace on the hotel and room kind of a business. And they are really troubling it, not so much in India, but at least in developed markets, being very, very strong. So, the whole fun is today that you can develop locally and you can sell globally. But the question is, where do I sell and when do I sell? So, if I have to expand globally, which market should I choose, which market should I not choose, and how do I do it? And as we all learn in B school, the simple answer is, it depends. It depends, but I can give you some examples of when, what you have to choose. For example, you are a game developer, right? Like suppose you are making a classic game in mobile games. And I don't know if you know, but today game developers make millions of dollars. There is a company called Machine Zone in the US which makes a mobile game. It's earning $3 million, $4 million a day. Today, they are making $3 million, $4 million a day. Candy Crush, I'm sure some of you would have played this, at its peak was earning much more than that. They were earning close to $4 to $5 million. They got valued initially at some very crazy number. For the IPO, after IPO, their stock price is tanked now. But they were valued very high. So, for those kinds of companies where the core product is the game itself, you can continue to keep the whole engineering product engineering in one place. Because the distribution is very simple, right? Because I can put my app on, say, India App Store, in US App Store, in Germany App Store, in Russian App Store, I can get the distribution done. So in that case, you don't really need to geographically expand. You can continue being in one location as long as you are not scared for talent. As long as you are getting talent, that's why you see a lot of these product companies are based out of Silicon Valley because they have a lot of talent there, and the distribution of their product and services, because it's an iPhone or an Android app model, is much easier. However, on the other side, for example, take Uber for example, as I was giving them, right? The whole product, if you see, you have nailed it, is very simple. It's just an aggregation, a marketplace of buyer and seller. Sellers being the taxi services and buyers being people who want to consume that service. Now, this model is fairly easy to copy. If that is the case, if I have to expand and I have to take a head start, I have to really expand at a very rapid pace. So, because the product is very simple, it is very easy to copy. The core is that the pricing, the competition, the regulation, which are very, very local. So for them as an organization, it makes a lot of sense to really expand as fast as possible in as many geographies and capture that market before a local competitor starts gathering that. So that's why, for example, when Ola was there, but Uber still is trying to keep pushing a lot of services. I think recently came up with Uber Go. Yesterday they announced where they don't compete with the autos in India. So and this is exactly what they do. So they have this whole track record that every week they have to open a new city. Today I think they are in more than 120 cities. Their aim by end of the year is to at least 150, 160 cities. Or for example, a music app, and I'm giving examples from my industry, but I'm sure the principles are very similar. Or for example, music industry like Sawan, you have Spotify in the US. Now for them to distribute music, you have to work to understand the local genre of the music, to understand local advertising, because that's how they monetize. So for them also it makes a lot of sense to expand as fast as possible. So some guidelines which I think one should keep in mind when you are trying to expand globally is that if you can keep the product design as long as possible in one place, much easier, because I'll share when for example the Yahoo Alibaba example I'll give you later in the session, that they tried to do a lot of different things and they failed miserably in the beginning. So Yahoo tried to enter China twice before it failed, before of course the Israel partnership with Alibaba. But as long as you can keep your product and the whole engineering at one place, it makes a lot of sense. Don't get into a spaghetti business. When I say spaghetti business, you have a lot of businesses in a lot of different geographies. So you should not happen that you are in 25 countries and managing those will be a crazy business. So avoid any spaghetti business. Choose your markets, pick your countries and then only focus on them rather than trying to do a lot of things. And I'm sure this applies in the product management field also. Interesting thing which Inmobi did well was that we used our inside channel very well. So what we used to do is that we used to, initially when we are trying to launch a new market, there would be me and my team who would really try to understand the market. We'll do a lot of cold calls, we'll talk to some customers, we'll ask for references. If there is an event which happens in that market, we go and visit it. We get a little bit of understanding of the market, we start building it, we start doing sales. And after some time, when that scale starts picking up, we realize that it makes a lot of sense to hire locally. And that's when we go and invest in that country, we hire a local GM and then he or she builds the business. So the way companies are now looking at sales and expansion of markets, this kind of model is trying to do very well, where you have people from the HO who are trying to understand that local market and get the business going to some level, and once they really understood that cultural nuances, and trust me, culture plays a very, very important role when you're trying to expand to new market, is then you start investing locally and then you start building from there. And this is exactly what Inmobi story is all about. So we started somewhere in 2008 and this was a time early 2009 and we wanted to expand. Now for us, we are a product based company, it made a lot of sense to say go to the west, in Silicon Valley, and go to the US and do the business there. But Naveen, the CEO, had a very good vision that he was very clear that if I would have gone to US at that time, we would have got killed, because there was already one company which was ahead of us, AdMob, which Google eventually acquired. And they were doing better than us, and either I can go to that market face head on, or I can use a very blue ocean strategy, and we, instead of going west, started to think going east. So we actually ventured out into Southeast Asia, we ventured out into Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, and then of course eventually the whole of Asia, which is China, Korea, Japan, and we, instead of going to the west, we went to Africa. Now, all of us would think Africa, dark continent, where is the money they'll pay, but it was mind-blowing. In some sense, Africa is truly a mobile-first country. Because of the whole access problem, they are able to solve that and leapfrog through using mobile. For example, in Nigeria, 3G came before India, and a lot of interesting services around mobile is built in that countries. Whether it is, say, the mobile money which we talked about has been there in Kenya for quite some time, called M-Pesa. So, very interesting thing. So, when you evaluate markets, keep these things in mind, and accordingly you try to plan which markets to go, which markets not to enter. Anything?
Yes, sorry, I have a question.
Sure.
So, how do you understand see, different countries, right? It looks good on the map.
Correct.
But each country, right? Each region within that country has its own culture.
Correct.
Right? So, when you have inside sales, right, sitting in not in the native country where your headquarters is, what kind of challenges you face? How do you make people understand the context, navigating all that stuff?
So it depends. So see, I mean, in some of the English-speaking countries, it is a much easier because at least language is not a barrier. So for us, that's why Africa made a lot of sense, because in South Africa people understood English. There were a lot of Indian origin people there. They had understanding of technology thanks to the brand which Infosys TCS had built that time. But when we ventured into China, yes, inside sales will definitely will, and we directly hired people locally, understand that context and do that. So to begin with, if it is English-speaking countries, at least language is not a barrier. If they are closer to India or they have some Indian relationship, that's why Southeast Asia, for example, made a lot of sense for us, because there are a lot of Indian origin people which are already there, so it makes that connect much easier. And also, trust me, it also became that Naveen came from Harvard. His batchmates were all over the world, wherever he had good friendships, and let's start with it. So there's always that little bit of serendipity, little bit of relationship, which also comes to the picture.
How do marketing, direct sales and inside sales is functioning in Inmobi? Because I think marketing is also required, right? A good marketing team, they can give you inside sales already, they will do research and they will help you in cold calling and everything. But marketing will help you in market your product and making a strategy for marketing for that country, like how they can target that particular customer or that particular segment.
So marketing is independent of what sales channel you are using, whether it is direct sales or inside sales. Marketing is different. Marketing is all about building the thought leadership. It is that customer connect, or it is helping in the pricing. It is building that lead funnel pipeline, right? So like, believe it or not, most of the biggest leads comes on your website, because people would have read an article about you, or they saw an event where you as a sales guy was speaking. So marketing is independent. It works as a different function in our organization, where they are trying to basically build either a thought leadership or a brand for Inmobi, or they are much more tactical and they are doing, for example, an SEO campaign. So if anybody searches mobile advertising in, say, Fiji or, say, example, Australia, they see that Inmobi ad comes there. So they are trying to do those tactical campaigns to basically build that sales funnel. After that, of course, there are some rules you can set, that if a particular customer is very high, like as in his revenue impact can be higher, or for example, if someone who needs a lot of face-to-face connect, you may want to do a direct sales team. I'll give you an example, right? So, for example, in our business, there are 2 or 3 kinds of customers largely. One are brands that typically like a Samsung or a BMW. Now, these guys really don't understand mobile, or they don't understand any medium. They outsource this business to their digital agency or their advertising agency who buy media on their behalf. Now for them, you have to do a lot of education, evangelism, you have to go meet them, tell them why mobile advertising is important, what is happening, what are the trends. So there we work with direct sales channels. So we direct hire people in, say, Australia, in US, in Europe, and they do it. But for example, online first or mobile first companies, say Flipkart, Alibaba, or say for example, Namchi is a big e-commerce guy in Middle East. Or for example, Zalora in Southeast Asia, or Lazada. Now these companies' bread and butter is technology, because that's where they build their business. Or somebody is making a mobile app or a game, for example, Candy Crush or a Supercell or Machine Zone. So these kinds of companies really understand mobile, digital. You don't have to sell mobile to them. A lot of this can happen on email and phone. So that's how we have segmented. That all direct brand customers will be direct sales channel, and all those kinds of customers which are more savvy about technology, understand their business, is more inside sales. Eventually, I would really don't want a human interface. I would ideally want that somebody wants to reach out to a consumer on, say, a mobile internet, just comes on my platform, books the budget, puts the targeting, and boom. And that's how I can really make a lot of money. But then there's the cost of margins are way too less.
And one more question, like I heard one interview of Naveen, I was hearing it. So he told that, as you rightly said, that you didn't go to west, you look towards east. But now companies like Google, Facebook, Yahoo, they're also coming into this, they also have that look east policy, and they are coming in a big way, like in India, in Indonesia, China. Google already, they are not there much in China, but they're coming in big way in Indonesia and Philippines and India. So how you're competing with those guys in selling?
You're making their life hell, trust me. So see, you have to also realize that, and why they are coming in India is that you have to realize that Asia emerging market will be a 4 billion consumer market very soon. There will be a lot of, See, that's the beauty about a country like India. Like yesterday, I've seen that there was a press conference which came that there are 300 million internet users in India. Now, even if I can earn $1 from them for the whole year, I'm a $300 million business. And the same thing applies for China, which has 600 million users. Same thing applies for Indonesia, which is the fourth largest by population. So yes, there's a lot of these companies that are coming to India, but you have to also realize the cultural nuances. That the way Westerners, the way Western companies operate is very different from the way Asian companies operate. So you have to really understand the local culture, you have to understand the local ethos, only then you will be able to succeed. Like for example, there is no Google, there is no Facebook in China and it's been banned. So Google can never enter China. Same thing with Facebook, same thing with Twitter for example. Now for a company like Inmobi, because we are Indians, we are not Westerners, we think more closely to the Asians, we are able to do very well in China. And in fact, this is what I also talk about when I go into each of these emerging markets and how we succeeded there. So that means that how we really started selling in some of these markets. So let's start with China, my favorite country in some sense. Massive scale. Like the definition of scale changes there completely different. There are 79 cities in China. Each city is bigger than the biggest metro in India. The kind of infrastructure they've invested in the last few years is mind-boggling. Like crazy, literally crazy. The kind of course, by size itself is massive. They have 600 million mobile internet users in that country. What was it? The bridges, the infrastructure, the ports we all know about. So really, really big. Another interesting thing about China, which we have to always remember, is that they love to copy. I remember I was at a conference 3.5 years back, and first thing a very senior person comes and says, China will love to copy. Any business which happens in Silicon Valley within few months is copied, reproduced in China. Like you like it or not, like for example, all the luxury brands, the kind of fake products you get in China is mind-blowing, and you can't make out that this is a real Louis Vuitton bag and this is a fake Louis Vuitton bag. They copy it so well. In fact, I remember 2-3.5 years back, I was in China in one of such fake market shops, and I said I want an iPhone. And the person, without any negotiations, comes and asks me, do you want an Android iPhone or an iOS iPhone? What does that mean? No sir, we copy Android phones also to make it look exactly like iPhone. And you can't make out, unless you really go to the App Store, you can't make out that it is a copied Android version of the iPhone. So, the kind of things they copy is massive. The other big and very interesting challenge, as somebody was pointing out, is the language. Language is a huge barrier. So in a lot of other countries, people still understand English, right? Even in Asia, for example, Southeast Asia. But in China, nobody really understands English. And that's also one of the reasons I'm learning Mandarin, because if you really need to crack that market, you have to start speaking that language. And there are very funny incidents happen. So I know how many, anybody knows Mandarin by any chance here? So in Mandarin, there are several tones there. There are 5 tones actually. So ma, ma are all different. And the arth ka anarth ho jata sometimes from the meaning. So shwai means to have water, and shwai also means kiss. So I was sitting in a restaurant and I'm trying to practice my Mandarin, and I says, can I have water? And I spoil the shwai and I tell to the waitress that I want to kiss you, and everybody just burst out laughing. So the point I'm trying to highlight is that language is a very, very big barrier in China, and one has to be very aware of that. So you cannot have people from India trying to do any sales in China. That is very interesting thing about China. And third thing, very interesting thing about China is that in order to succeed in that market, you have to adapt to the local culture. You can still, in the Western world, for example, if I want to sell from here to US or Australia or UK, I can do that. I cannot do that in China. So it is very, very important that you have to hire local people in China, which means that you need to start investing big there. So if you want to go in China, you really need to start investing big in there. And in some sense, you know, it's a truly mobile first company. Because if you've been to Beijing or Shanghai or Guangzhou, you will see that everything revolves around a mobile phone. Whether it is booking a taxi app, it is much more advanced. So here you just book an Ola. There's something called DD, where you can on the fly give the bidding that I want to travel from point A to point B, this is the maximum I'm able to give. And now tons of people do that, and then they decide which is the cheapest one, and that is the cab which comes to, all through technology. In fact, there are 3 major behemoths. Baidu, I'm sure you've heard about Baidu, that is the search engine of Google. Alibaba, Jack Ma became famous recently, and Tencent, the maker of WeChat. These three companies have done so much technology business and everything is around them. So any business which happens in the US in the Silicon Valley has a rip-off under one of these companies. And the scale is massive. There's an app in China called Mighty Shushu, MBITU, XIU. It has some 200 million female only people who are using it. And the app does a very stupid and funny thing. It makes you look beautiful. So if you have a dark skin, you look a little fairer. If you are a little fat, it makes you look thin. And there are 300 such million female users out there. Now, a Westerner, for example, can never appreciate that. So you really need to adapt to the local market. Like for example, when you sell games, none of these Western games really do very well. There is a very famous game called Subway Ski Surfer, which was like it's like a endless running, like a temple run or a Subway Surfer run. And it was like the whole app is made within China. Sorry, it was the whole app experience within hotel, like the Alps. So it was running in the Swiss Alps and that game. But when that same app came to China, they completely transformed it. For example, like India, China does not have a lot of memory. So you really need to make this game size very small. You need to customize to the local themes and elements. So in China, avatars do very well. So they made the whole user have an avatar, different kind of avatar. You can buy different virtual goods. You can do a lot of different things. So the point I'm trying to highlight is that if you really need to do very well in China, you have to start thinking local. Believe it or not, I have a Chinese name. I have a QQ number, and that is my identity in China. People can't pronounce Ankit. I have a Chinese name called Angie, and I have a QQ number. QQ number is like your identity. It was like a BlackBerry pin. It is very, very famous there. So if you have a QQ number, a lot of businesses only happens in QQ. And language is such a barrier that when I go in meetings, many times we are sitting in a conference call and we are all doing WeChat. Because WeChat is the local, you can't speak English that fluently, they can write English very well, so they are all doing WeChat in front of us. But that is how you have to do. And the last is of course that you have to keep adapting, fail fast, learn from it and do it. So for example, in Inmobi, no other country except China, we have a product manager who has customized a product for Chinese requirement. We have a reseller organization which is selling through a lot of channel partners only in China, and we have a whole legal and compliance team only for China, no other country. Everything else is headquartered except China. In fact, there is a very interesting article mentioning about Yahoo's experiences in China. There is a very interesting HBR article. If you just say Yahoo, Alibaba, HBR, you'll see a very interesting use case. As in, when Yahoo entered in China sometime around 1999, they first tried to build their whole product. They failed miserably. After that, they tried to buy a company and then tried to scale. They failed miserably. 3729 a company they acquired. Then finally, they said that if I have to really succeed in China, I will just invest in a local company and let the local company build the whole business. And then they did that business, and of course Alibaba, Yahoo, the classic story. So very interesting things about China. Things scale, hire local, fail fast or adapt fast. That's the way to really succeed in China.
And then how you are competing, basically how you are competing with those legal requirements and all. Because China, they don't like companies which come from outside.
No, so it's not that they don't like companies from China, it's just that the local laws, taxations are very different. For example, so you need to have a local entity which is there, which has some portion of it. So unlike Middle East, I know Middle East is even worse. In Middle East, you have to have a local sleeping partner. He'll do nothing but he'll just give your name. It's not as bad as China, but you need to have a local company and a local compliance there. Another very interesting thing in China is that one thing I'm just forgetting what was that. They are very Chinese within China, Korea, Japan. Chinese are the ones which are closest to India, and you can really use to the advantage. So Chinese, like India, is very chaotic. There are a lot of traffic jams. People survive, and they are able to survive in that kind of chaos, which, trust me, Japanese and Koreans didn't do. So when I was building this, as in when we built the sales for CJK markets, I had got some of these people from China, Korea, Japan come to India, and our office to our hotel was around 1.5 kilometers. And for some days, so the Chinese came early and the Koreans came a little late. And one particular day, I saw only the Chinese in the office, not the Koreans, and I was concerned what happened. And then I got to know that is the taxi did not come. So Chinese are smart enough to figure out the way, okay, let me walk from the hotel to the office. The Korean says, no, I am not going to the office till I don't get the taxi. So the point I am trying to highlight is that Chinese are very similar to Indians, the way they think they can thrive in chaos, they can figure out their way out, which the Koreans and Japanese don't do. So among Asians, if it is Japanese, it is all about relationships, all about trust. So you have to have trust, then you have relationship, and then you do business. Same thing, Koreans are somewhere in between, like geographically, and Chinese are exact opposite. We'll do business, that will help us build that trust, that will help us build that relationship. But in Japan, it's exact opposite. That's the, if you see, none of the Indian companies are doing very well in Japan, because even the system integrator like TCS, that's why they acquire a company, because their concept of value and helping you, this is at a lower cost price, doesn't matter. If you are not in those sphere of relationship, I will not do business with them. So they are very closely inward company in Japan, which is not the case with China. Anything on China?
Government regulations?
So government regulations, so internet is open there. They are a little bit xenophobic to Western countries, but not so much to India. Regulations are not that stringent. You have to just comply with the local businesses. Because you have a Tencent, for example, e-commerce guys, they're doing very well. You have messaging apps like WeChat and others doing well. So regulation is not that a challenge. We have not faced that much of a challenge. You need to invest in the local compliance and all those things. And the other very interesting thing about China is that unlike a lot of all the other markets, China you have a very small fixed cost and they have a very high variable cost. So in any sales organization, typically you have 70% as fixed salary and 30% as income as your variable. Depending on how you perform, you get that. In China, it's exact opposite. So you only have 30% fixed and 70% as sales commission. So you give massive targets in China and they'll be making it happen. And the last very interesting thing is that there is also about what about me. In a lot of conferences and meetings, after everything you have discussed, the individual person will say, what about me? So me doesn't mean the organization, me means I as a person. So you have to be very good at those things. Then how do you ensure that that particular decision maker is also benefiting the whole process in some sense?
So which side do you find more difficult to deal with, the supply side or the demand side? Where do you as a sales guy has to spend more time with the app guys who sell the inventory to you or the guys who buy that inventory?
So for us, it is the sales. So I'm only on the sales side, and I think that is the more challenging thing because that is much more local. See, if I am on the supply side, which is the NDTV app in my case, the NDTV app, if I tie up with it in India, whether the app opens in US or Korea or China or UK, doesn't matter because I have tied up with the origin. So for me, the challenging part is the sales guy because if I have to sell the NDTV inventory in India is different from the way I have to sell it in Singapore, the way I have to sell it in say China.
So these inventories that you buy, aren't they regional? Like if you buy NDTV inventory, isn't it like only for India consumption or?
See, that's the challenge, right? Because when I'm buying an inventory for an NDTV app, the app can be opened from anywhere in the world. Now he can't make that distinction. So he will say you have to take it all. So it is all in kind of stuff.
So they don't do location based.
They can do, but generally they don't want to do it. Some companies like some publishers like say CNN or a BBC because they are much more global, they will do it. But take for example an app, right? We monetize a lot of our inventory for a particular app, say Angry Birds. Now Angry Birds guy is sitting in Finland, Rovio. He just wants to monetize. Now he doesn't have the wherewithal to monetize in India and China and Korea. So they gave it all to us and then we have to figure out. And that's also one of our competitive advantage. And of course Facebook, Google also India, but not other regional places that we are geographically spread. So I can monetize his inventory better than other guys which are very regional in it.
The quality of the product depends on the material of product.
Correct.
So manufacturing the product means material also is it possible to make it in China itself or they will import from other places?
So from what I know, because I am not working in manufacturing, but from what I know that South China is considered the factory of the world. So a lot of manufacturing hub is there, Guangzhou and Hangzhou, those areas. But the raw materials for that doesn't come from China. A lot of it comes, for example, iron ore. India is one of the large exporters of the iron ore, without making it steel, goes from India. Australia, for example, exports a lot of raw materials to China. They make the finished goods and then they sell it back to US and Europe and India. So that's why, for example, the trade balance between India and China is much more skewed towards China. because they import much little from us, but they export a lot of products to us. In fact, that's what Modi ji is trying to change the trade deficit which we have from China.
I'll start with a question. So, say you're a small company, right?
Yeah.
So Inmobi comes from a marketing space where you already know there's a marketing team and you want to sell it. Say you have a technology that you know that company has a need for. How do you find the right audience? Like you said, what about me? Right? So you kind of need to find a guy who's going to be your representative in the company. So is there a method to that to say to find out the right audience in the company to kind of pitch the product? Or how do you do that?
So the best way to do that is that you need to find first one person in that company. So the way we have been able to crack is that we attend some of these conferences. So once we are trying to enter a new market, we figure out that in my industry this is a conference which is going to happen. I go and meet a lot of people in that. At least he gives me that headway to go to the right decision maker in the company. So for example, I wanted to sell to say Tencent, I would go and meet somebody in Tencent. He may be relevant, he may not be relevant, but at least he is the first point of connect to the right person in that. And as I evolve, the other way to look at it is that if I can't sell locally because I don't have the relationship, I will rather hire a local agency. He brings the relationship in place, and I get the technology. So in other markets, for example, in Russia, where we did not want to invest so much in people and we did not take that cost, we partnered with a local agency there, and they are the reseller of our product. Because I know he can't copy, and then you have to be very smart that you partner with somebody who can't copy your product. See, tomorrow it should not happen that he starts selling as his own product. So he should bring complementary skills on the table. So I will partner with somebody who is an agency who knows the local relationship, and I will get the technology. I'll just continue, maybe we can have discussion after that. Then you of course have Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia has 11 countries, but honestly there are only 6 which matter. Indonesia, you have Philippines, Vietnam, Singapore of course, and then Thailand. So there are all the other countries which are very, very small, you really don't bother. And the way to really approach this is you have a hub and spoke model. Singapore becomes your hub, and then these regions are not very far from these markets. It's a 1.5 hour flight. And Singapore, if most of these companies have some office in Singapore, so Singapore becomes your hub, and then all the other smaller companies becomes your spoke to which you can market. The challenge in some of these markets is that the talent is a big constraint. You really don't get a lot of talent. The good news on the other side is that they have a lot of Indian diaspora. In fact, in some countries like Vietnam and Cambodia, you have ethnic Indians who've been there for 200, 300 years. In fact, there are temples like the Angkor Wat, which is one of the big temples in Cambodia. In fact, it's the largest Hindu temple. In fact, bigger than even the ones in India. Is made out of Cambodia. So they have a lot of ethnic Indians. So it becomes a little easier to do business in some of these markets. And language is not that a constraint. So English, most of the business people at least speak. So there are of course local flavor. People do speak Thai, or if you go to Indonesia, they have Bahasa as a local language. But people still speak English, at least the business people. So it is much easier to do business there. And you have Singapore as your hub, and then you can really penetrate in some of these markets. You have to prioritize. Indonesia makes a lot of sense because of the whole scale thing. In Indonesia, for example, it is the 4th largest country in population after US. So China, India, US and Indonesia. So if you are in internet business and internet is really growing like in India, mobile internet is much bigger than desktop PC. So in that, if you are in that technology space, you can really do very well there. Then of course you have Philippines. It's a very good English speaking market. So if you really want to crack that, if language is not that a barrier, it makes a lot of sense to go to Philippines. And Philippines is also very technology savvy. I'm sure if anybody from the business, outsourcing business, a lot of our call centers are being shifted to Philippines. Vietnam is an interesting market because it is more closer to China. So language is a constraint, but they are very, very technology savvy actually. In fact, I was in Vietnam holiday and I was surprised that any place, whether it is a small hotel, a shack or a restaurant or cafe, had free Wi-Fi. Like unlike India, see in India you don't get Wi-Fi that easily, but there, maybe because of tourism is so big in Vietnam, every small place there has very good connectivity. So for technology, it is a very good business to be, and because they don't like Chinese, and India is the only large regional player, they want to come closer to India. So if they have to choose between a Chinese company and Indian company, they will always prefer an Indian company because of their historic animosities with China. So that also you can use to your advantage. And then of course you have Malaysia, which is more closer to Singapore, honestly. So if you are there in Singapore, you can easily do very good business in Malaysia. So this is how you can really work in Southeast Asia, hub and spoke model. It's exactly how we did. So we have an office in Singapore, and then we have very small 1 or 2 person people working from home in some of these other markets. In Malaysia we have an office, but for example Thailand, Malaysia, Philippines, we actually don't have an office. We have somebody from Singapore who flies regularly and able to do business there. And we are able to leverage our inside sales model very well here. So for example, in our domain, online first companies, whether it is e-commerce companies or gaming companies, are coming very big in Southeast Asia. So Zalora, which is part of like a Myntra of Southeast Asia, or Lazada, or for example, there's a company called VNG Corp, which is like Airtel of India. It's based in Vietnam. We are able to do a lot of business with them only through the inside sales model, because these guys speak good English, and language, technology is not a barrier, and all of them will have an office in Singapore. So it's much easier to do business there. And trust me, some of these markets like Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines are very good markets, and they are also very virgin markets, because none of these Western companies really invest that big time in here. So if you have a technology product, it is easy to penetrate it, more of a closed strategy. Because China, you have a lot of competition. The local Chinese companies are very tech savvy, not so much these companies. You can use that as an advantage. Cool. So I also had the opportunity. In fact, when I started at Inmobi, I in fact started with Africa. I still remember I joined from B school. I said, "Where's my induction plan?" My boss said, "You have a passport." I said, "What has induction plan to do with a passport?" He put me on a flight to South Africa, and I was selling mobile advertising. So I started my business. In fact, my sales experience from Africa. And again, when you think of Africa, you think of 53 countries. How do you really go about selling? But Africa, if you think, is actually 4 regional hubs. You have South Africa, which honestly people there don't think they are part of Africa, and it is true in some sense, because the kind of infrastructure they have is much better than Africa. So South Africa is like the gateway to Africa. If you want to really venture, South Africa makes a lot of sense, because business regulation wise, compliance wise, language is not a barrier. There are a lot of English speaking people, a lot of Indian origin people there. So South Africa becomes the gateway for Africa. Then you have of course East Africa, which is Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, Uganda and Burundi. There are 5 such countries, but Kenya is the central east hub for them. So if you just open an office in Nairobi, you will be able to do business there. Again, as I said, for Kenya, they are very ahead in mobile technology. In fact, the mobile money which we are talking about now in India has been in Kenya for the last 3-4 years. There's a platform called M-Pesa, which is Safaricom, is the largest operators offering there, which now they are trying to replicate in India. If you see, Vodafone has launched that M-Pesa thing, but it has been there. Everything around technologies, whether it is healthcare, whether it is communication, all built, all finance is all built around mobile. So Kenya can be a good gateway, and Kenya, of course, Indians get one of those few countries, at least that time, used to get visa on arrival. Kenya is one such country. And because there are a lot of ethnic Indians there. Then of course you have Nigeria. Nigeria is the largest country in Africa. It has close to 170 million people, massive scale, and it is also the hub of other Western African countries like Ghana, Ivory Coast, and of course now it is in bad news because of the Ebola virus, Sierra Leone and those countries. But of course Nigeria is the biggest of them. Though Nigeria has its own challenges, taxation, withholding tax is very high. It is very difficult to take money outside Nigeria. So it makes a lot of sense to work with a local company there. Language is not a problem. But among all Africans, Nigerians are the most aggressive people. I have worked with a lot of Africans. East Africans, South Africans are much more sober, much more humble. West Africans are the most, especially Nigerians are very, very aggressive kind of people. So it's a difficult market because there's a lot of oil money also there in Nigeria. And of course they have their own strife between South Nigeria and North Nigeria. So there's a lot of fight which keeps happening. And of course last is Egypt. Again, these days after the Arab Spring, actually the business environment has really plummeted in there. So it's rather to avoid. But Egypt, for example, we have the whole of North Africa. So it was Algeria, Tanzania. Did some visits there, but it was very tough, honestly. And also the whole Arab Spring happened, so not a lot of business really happening these days in Africa. Moving on, I have not worked in Latin America, but I have colleagues who work there. In Latin America, if you have to really penetrate, there are largely 3 markets: Brazil, Argentina, Mexico. Brazil, of course, is that country which is much more open among the whole of Latin America. People are much more chilled out, they are not as xenophobic some of the other Latin American markets. However, having said that, there are a lot of structural problems in these companies, like withholding tax. So if you are doing business and you want to repatriate that money, to your country, they have very high withholding taxes. So the best strategy again here is to work with a local partner. Language is a challenge. So within Latin America, Brazil speaks Portuguese and the rest of Latin America speaks Spanish, and business language is either Portuguese or Spanish. So it is tough to really do business. It's better than China, but still it is tough. So language is a barrier in some of these markets. Argentinians are much more orthodox, much more close than say Brazilian. So within Latin, if you have to choose a market, Brazil makes more sense. And of course, Mexicans are more Hispanic, so they are more closer to US. And trust is a very important factor. So I remember when we were trying to do the inside sales model, when we were trying to call them on phone, email, they were not responding, especially Argentinians and the others. But once you go there, meet them, show your face, it is much easier to do business. The system integrators in India, I think TCS and Infosys, Wipro has some good business in Sao Paulo. So Brazil, they have a big facility. So at least Brazilians know people, technology companies from India, and they are much more open. Moving on, the last country, of course, is Russia. Russia is the land of oligarchs, so like there are 11 time zones in Russia, by the way. It is one of the least densely populated countries. Again, it is very, very bureaucratic. After the collapse of Soviet Union, there are few people who really made a lot of money. So they call them the Russian oligarchs, and unless you really know the right people, you really can't do very well business in Russia. Taxation is of course a challenge, compliance is a big problem, they have a whole piracy issues. Again, unlike China, you don't have Google or Facebook which are big in these countries. You have Yandex, which is a local search engine. You have VK, which is the local Facebook. Though in China they are banned, these guys, Google, Facebook, but they are not banned here, but they are still not the number one in their space. You have a Yandex or a Mail.ru, or for example VK.com, which is the local social networking. For chatting, they don't use WhatsApp, they use something called Telegram, which is also becoming popular in India. And the way to really penetrate this market is to really partner with the local guy. It doesn't make any sense because language also is a barrier in this market at least. But there is good money to be made. Between the bricks, the art there, so you can make good money, but you have to partner with really the local guy.
Does it help India and Russia relationship is strong? So does it help?
Honestly, no. So you'll be surprised to know Mithun Chakrabarti is one of the famous guys there, and that's what they really know about India. So though we have had historic ties, it has not been really helpful from a business community. You really need, because it is very, very bureaucratic. Unless you know the right people in the government or in the right things, don't move at all there. So yes, they have a, so that's the best part about India. You know, if you go outside India, you zoom out, Indians enjoy a very neutral image. So unlike if you go to like Chinese, they are very deadly against Japanese because of their history, or between Russians and Americans. India has a very neutral kind of a thing. Of course, after Modi's visit, that also is becoming much more positive, because we keep hearing this from our clients, because a lot of our clients ask like what's happening, who's this guy and stuff like that. But coming to your specific, no. The historic time in India and Russia just gets the conversation starting but doesn't really help. And that is how they have made it that it is, the local government, for example, favors in terms of taxation for the local IT companies. So it makes a lot of sense to really partner with the local IT company rather than trying to building it from scratch. So Russia, of course, it's the 6th or 7th largest country. Has close to 300 plus million population. They are very tech savvy. They are close to 200 plus million internet users. There are 11 time zones. We hear about 2 cities, Moscow and St. Petersburg, but they have a lot of other cities. Like in my sphere, I can't vouch for others, but in my sphere, for example, gaming is a very big vertical here. So a lot of Russian people, if you see, are hackers, and there are a lot of people, they are very tech savvy. So these people spend a lot of time making software code. These guys play a lot of games on the mobile devices. In fact, some of the large games which are being played these days, there's a game called War of Tanks, which came from a local company in China called War Gaming. There's another game called The Perfect World, came from a Russian company. So from a technology perspective, they are quite savvy, quite clued in. It's also a good consumer market, but penetrating from outside is very difficult. You need to have a local partner for sure to succeed here, because language is a barrier, there's bureaucracy, and there's a lot of piracy, and the local taxation is very complex for an outside market.
So you have a local partner. Did it help to build business in extended Middle East, which is basically part of, earlier it was part of Soviet Union?
So CIS countries, you're saying Ukraine, Belarus. Honestly, we are not yet tapped into the market. Russia has been one of the last countries we have ventured up. And we have not yet looked into the other markets like Ukraine or Belarus or Kazakhstan. Russia itself is massive for us to really bite more than what we can digest.
You spoke about the withholding tax, and you were saying that you have a local partner by virtue of which that could be avoided. So how does that really work?
So this local partner would have an office in Singapore and he would have an office in Russia. So whatever business transactions and profit we make, he pays it to the local entity there. There is no withholding tax, and the money which is attributed to us comes from their Singapore office. Right? So they have an internal transfer pricing, but he pays us from the Singapore office. So I avoid any kind of withholding tax. And because all the costs are also local, he is able to rotate that money within Russia. So when I say local partner, somebody who has a leg in one country and a leg in my favorite country, which is Singapore. Cool. So before I end, I just wanted to share that since I've been doing sales for 5.5 years, what do you think is a good salesman or who's a good salesman? And as I was saying, right, like it or not, all of us are salesmen. Either we are selling an idea, or we are selling a product, or we are selling a concept internally. And if I am a salesman, I am selling it to the customer. And if I am a husband, I am selling to my wife that be it Saturday, but let me come here. So all of us are a salesman. So what are the good traits of a salesman? The first thing is very important is that when in Rome, be like Romans. The point I'm trying to highlight is that, as I was saying, that sales today is becoming much more complex. Because it is more about solution selling. And like for example, in any B2B environment, there are 3 or 4 decision makers who are there. One are those financial users or economic users who know that if I implement a particular technology or a service, it will be beneficial for me. So they look more from a cost perspective or a savings perspective. So when you are talking to those kinds of guys, you talk about their language. Or for example, there are guys who are going to really use your product or a solution. So they are the real users of the service. So for them, it is more about firstly, hope this product doesn't put me out of my job. Right? This was happening in the banking. Solutions were coming in. These guys at the banks were not open to it because they thought they will be out of job. So the solutions I'm trying to provide, does it help me solve my problem? It does it improve my efficiency? Does it help me cut my time? And it doesn't put me out of the job. So when you speak to those kinds of customers, you have to speak their language. Or for example, they are technical guys, right? So these are guys whose yes does not matter, but their no does matter. So if he's a technical guy, says, oh, my particular solution does not compatible with yours, we can't take your product, we can't take your solution. So how do you really ensure that they are aligned with your solution, you get a buy-in? And last but not the least, there are also these gurus or those opinion makers or influencers, I call them, who really says that, like for example, we say Smack is the next technology and everybody wants to do something on social or mobile or analytics. So you also need to influence these guys because these are the guys who make those thought leadership. So how do you influence these thought leadership? So whenever you're trying to do sales, you need to talk to understand who your target audience is, and then you have to speak their language. The second most important thing about successful in sales is that it is not that I am smart, it is just that I show up. In fact, it is said that 80% of success comes when you just keep trying. Albert Einstein said that I just don't solve problem innovatively, it's just that I spend more time with them. So I'll show you some very interesting images. This was a game which was developed by a company, this failed. Then they developed this game, it failed. Then they developed this game, it failed. And finally they came up with something like this, which all of us recognize. This is the 42nd version from Rovio, the game which really became the most downloaded game ever in history, the Angry Birds. So they failed almost 42 times before they came up with this game. So this exactly applies with sales people, that you have to be really, really persistent, you have to be really, really patient to really make sales happen. And you have to keep showing up. Because like it or not, somebody does a business with somebody because he or she is the top of mind recall. So the question is that if I am dealing with 10 people, I can easily show up. But if I am dealing with 100 customers, 1000 customers, how do I show up? I may not show up physically, but can I show up through a thought leadership? And that's why marketing becomes very important, that how do you build that brand, how do you build that thought leadership. Even in a B2C space, it is very easy. You do a broadcast on TV, you keep doing a lot of hoardings and everything, right? That's very easy. For example, Pepsi and Coke, there's so much advertising. Everybody knows Pepsi and Coke. They're still one of the heaviest spenders, just because of that top of mind recall. And same thing applies in a B2B environment, that how can I become the top of mind recall for my space. So today if you think of cool stuff, Apple is one of that name which always comes, right? So how can I keep showing up? How can I keep demonstrating that patience and perseverance to make it happen? And the last very interesting thing is that, see, today when we try to sell, we try to talk about the data, presentations, research reports. That doesn't really help. To speak to the mind, you have to, sorry, to speak to the heart, you have to move the mind. And that largely happens through stories. If I can convey one or two stories you guys remember today after the session, I think I have done it well. Because everyone loves to hear stories. And in any story, you would have a protagonist or the main person who's the protagonist of the whole thing. Then, of course, you will have a plot where you will have a beginning and an end, and you have some kind of struggle which you want to convey. You will have the whole place where you are trying to set the whole story, so the various contexts in the environment, and last, of course, the purpose of what you are trying to convey as a message. So, whenever you are trying to make sales pitch, and again, Steve Jobs is a classic example of it, he would always tell you a lot of stories. He will always tell that this is where you guys are, and if you use my technology or a product, this is where you will get. And he'll keep telling very interesting stories from how can you move from here to there. And that's exactly what a good salesman is. That he will tell you a lot of interesting stories, he will tell you a lot of personal anecdotes, experiences, and that's what makes you a good salesman. Not a lot of data, not a lot of reports and what's happening. And that's what I've been trying to tell you a lot of interesting stories. So that's it. That's it from me. More than happy to take more questions.
I have one question. At the beginning of your presentation, you said in God we trust, everyone else brings data. Right? In your concluding slide, you basically said stories.
No,
so how do you marry, again, as a salesperson, right? Yes, you have a full-time job as a salesperson. So help me with how do you bring the two pieces together? How do you process that view?
So, see, the way where I was talking about data was more about when I'm measuring sales, I'm looking at these kinds of data. But when I'm pitching to a client, I'm not throwing data at him. I'm trying to tell a story. I'm trying to tell that how my solution will make the life. But when I'm measuring the effectiveness of my sales team, my sales organization, when I'm talking about data.
Okay, thank you. I have two questions. One is enterprise mobility is another space, right? Do you have anything in your roadmap for that space? Does it even make sense for you to do anything in that space at all?
So, see, we are a distribution company. Inmobi is a distribution company. We have somebody who wants to reach out to somebody, like an advertiser. So, I am a BMW or I am a mobile game, and I am trying to reach out to a consumer. And we are a distribution company. So, we are not in the enterprise space. But tomorrow, for example, IBM makes a solution for something, and he may say, I want to reach out to business users. So, that's where we can help them. For example, we are doing some campaigns for the Accenture of the world and IBM, where they are basically trying to get their product reach out to them. But we are more of a distribution channel, like you have TV, like you have, but we are not making any app or an enterprise thing. So we are not an app development company, we are a distribution channel. And I can distribute anything. Now, most of my focus has been on a B2C, but maybe at one point I'll also do B2B.
But no plans?
As of now, no.
Second question is, what can we expect in terms of experience, next generation experience in terms of ads from the next few years?
So, see, as I was telling you, that this opportunity is massive. Right? Today, what is happening is that a lot of consumers, users are moving away from TV screens, from print media, and they are consuming content on mobile devices. So, our endeavor is that how can I ensure that I capture those users and make the whole advertising process much more engaging, much more fun. So, in some sense, they are trying to solve two very basic fundamental problems. A, I make the whole advertising much more engaging and is not intrusive. So, we are trying to do a lot of creative services. So, for example, today you see banner, but if you've been following NDTV today, an ad comes which is like a news feed. So, it is called native advertising in our business. So, we are trying to make the whole advertising process much more art, so that it is much more engaging. And the other most thing is we are trying to become a part science company, where we are showing that each one of you are different, each one of you like at different things, and can I target the right ad to the right user at the right context. So, for example, I am someone who loves soccer, and in the evening, if you can give me a 10% discount voucher for a soccer match at a club, I would enjoy it. But for somebody, she's a fashion enthusiast and she's looking for the next Jimmy Choo shoe, and if you can give me a discount with that. So, how can I ensure that advertising, which is more broad based, becomes much more narrow, much more targeted, in fact, one-to-one. So that's why we are collecting humongous amount of data and then trying to see if we can serve the right ad to the right user. So our focus and endeavor in the next few years is either try to solve the ad problem to make it much more engaging, or solve the targeting problem to make it really targeted. Like even today, if you see, you and I may see the same ad on NDTV, but I and you are very different people. Our tastes and likes are very different. So I and you should see different ads. So I am trying to, for example, build a lot of data on your persona. And that's what I was sharing with you. Like for example, today through Inmobi's SDK, I would not know who your name is, but I would know that every day morning you browse news, you check your stock updates, you play a game while commuting to office, you check the Bollywood masala after lunch and all those things, and then I know who you are, what are your tastes like, and then can I start showing you that relevant ad, because then your action on that ad is much more better. So that's what we are trying to do as a company, and that will continue for the next few years.
Will there be any legal issues depending on how you are collecting the data in the country?
So, and that's where it becomes a little murky because a lot of privacy concerns comes into
picture. Now you are not very generic. You are trying to.
Correct. So again, see, as long as I am not really targeting, honestly in India there is no rules for it, but in the US there are a lot of this SOPA and those kinds of things. But see, I don't know you as a person, I just know your behavior, and I'm just trying to target you on your behavior, and my value addition is that ultimately I'm trying to enrich your advertising experience. See, all of us consume advertising, it's just that the way we are consuming it today is not very interactive and intrusive. So yes, there are privacy concerns, and there are companies like Google and say Microsoft or say Google or even Inmobi, we do adhere to the privacy standard. But our sole objective is not to really say I'm not using your data and I'm trying to give you the right message which you also like. So that's where it's a win-win. So for example, we are having system where it is more of an opt-in, like the caller thing, right? Today when you used to get a lot of calls, DND came into picture and then you had your own opt-in. So the way marketing is moving away, and it's not I am telling, this is what Seth Godin, one of the gurus in this world, said that the way marketing will evolve is more from an opt-in. It's not that you don't like marketing message, it's just that you don't get the kind of message you want to see. But if you show your interest and I show those relevant marketing stuff, you will be much more interesting. So the answer is no. As long as I adhere, I don't use your data to start. For example, I know your user behavior on the phone, and then I pass it to an advertising company or I pass it to an insurance company, for example. And that's where it becomes. But the standard and guidelines is still evolving. Nobody knows the
exact. You are capturing the data and you are only using that data for the capturing the behavior and putting some ads.
Correct. So that's what I said, right? If for example, if I got to know that you are a movie enthusiast, and if I show you an ad of a book my show that gives you a 10% discount of the kind of movie you look, you will not dislike that kind of a concept. So our endeavor is to get there. Trust, it is very difficult today to even reach that level because there are multiple complexities in this problem. So
you talked about NDTV being one of your customers. So then does the SDK sit on their premise?
SDK is baked in within the app. So the moment you open the instance of NDTV on your app, the client, we get to know that you have opened it, and I would get to know which phone you are using, which city you are coming from, which say telecom operator are you using, what is the time of the day, I can anyways know, and then I can bake an ad which suits to your kind of persona.
So all the data that you get is from
So in our business there are three kinds of data. We call it first party, second party, third party. First party data is exactly what I get from NDTV. When you are using the SDK, which I have baked within SDK of the NDTV. The second party data is that I am collecting, like if I am showing you ad, what ads are you clicking? If you are clicking the ad, did you go, say for example, downloaded the app? Or for example, if you are doing a registration on the website, you need to do that. So we call it second party data. And the third party's data is this, there are a lot of these independent data platforms, like Nielsen for example. In our world, we have someone called Factual or Blue Kite, which is very similar to say a Nielsen or a ComScore. We call them third party data. So it's a combination of this first, second, third party data.
So see, one big movement which is happening on the web browsing, the mobile space also, and in general the internet is with HTML and browsers becoming more and more advanced. A lot of action which was earlier happening in the app world is now actually getting moved to the browser.
No, I beg to differ. So in fact, initially this was believed because Facebook, for example, they were big proponent of HTML5, but very soon they realized that they are way behind because the kind of feature you want to capture. For example, on HTML5, you can't capture the camera today. You can't make a use case of an app on HTML5 which will capture the camera, though you can do it on the native platform. Of course, they have its own challenges of having to distribute the app on iOS, Android, and now Windows. But having said that, the view in the industry is that native is still the way to go because you have much more tighter control of your app than if you are on a browser platform.
Okay, so but see, there's nothing which stops browser from tapping into camera, right?
No, so
it's ultimately. So see, basically, if you see that from an ecosystem perspective, right? Me as a developer, right? I don't have to bother about developing my app on 3 different platforms and have a recurring effort. I do it on a browser, it's available on all the platforms. And to some extent, I get the power in the system not to go with the iOS or Android and sit with these guys and negotiate to get my app listed. Right? So, and if you look at from the big companies like Google, it makes a lot of sense because they having the desktop presence or the browser presence, their ability to control that segment is going to be a lot more. So there is obviously a lot of incentive for them to make this happen.
No, but they also have the Android whole ecosystem, right? So again, what you're saying ideally made a lot of sense. It is exactly, for example, Facebook was betting big on. So if you think 2.5 years back, Facebook was betting big on the browser space, but then they eschewed it and they avoided it because the technology in the browser is not evolved enough to harness the power of the phone which a native app is able to do. Whether it is camera, whether it is the storage, whether it is the processing power of the phone, it is much easier to do it on the native OS, whether it is iOS or Android or Windows, than it was on the browser. What I'm making sense, a lot of sense, but somehow the technology has not been able to leapfrog to that, and people are now avoiding any kind of browser game. So today they always think of the native app rather than the browser game.
So it's also the thought, right, when it's about reaching the customers. So customers have a mobile phone in their hand all the time. They don't have access to a desktop browser all the time. So if you want to reach more customers when people are commuting to mobile phones,
you always open the browser on your phone.
I think it's much more easier for an app to kind of.
Correct. The user experience is much more seamless because you have much more power within the native app than on user.
That's the reason that when the target is to reach the customers and not make the browser reach the customers.
It's not the problem of distribution. At the end of the day, the app itself has to be much more easy. Its user experience will be much better, which is there on the native. If the technology on the browser would have caught up, then it had made a lot of sense. But somehow the technology is not caught up. That's the problem.
What are the main challenges or the differences you see in the mobile-based advertising compared to, say, the desktop or the browser-based advertising, which, say, Google had really pioneered with the accents and all? So, how does it? Is it more of an extension?
So, see, again, it is an extension, no doubt. But what is happening, as somebody was saying just now, that the number of devices you have today are much more. And like it or not, mobile phone is today like your second shadow, right? It's always in your arm's length distance, like do you keep it on the table? You're not carrying your desktop PC all the time. And more people are now consuming content on these handheld devices than on TV. So if the consumer starts moving here, all advertising agencies have to go, because ultimately advertising ad dollars follow the user eyeballs. Now most of the eyeballs are on this screen, not on a PC screen or not even on a TV screen. Not so much in India, but at least in the US, more people are now spending time consuming content on these devices, whether it is a tablet, than on even TV. India is still TV first country. So that's the very reason that it is not by design, it is like what the consumer behavior is. So advertising companies have to follow. Of course, there are challenges on each platform, right? So one of the biggest challenges is the whole distribution channel. On the desktop, you have just one browser. You can drop one cookie and that's it, you are set. Here at least you have 3 platforms. Within each platform, iOS is still okay. Within Android, you have humongous version. So your app may work on one version, your app may not work on version. So there is a lot of back and forth which happens today on the Android platform. Then you have so many different screen sizes, right? Your app has to fit every screen size. It is not just one desktop browser. So there are much more plethora of challenges also on the mobile ecosystem, which is not there on desktop system. But like it or not, consumers are moving to mobile, so advertising companies have to move.
Guys, we'll stop it here. We have a IT down there. Okay. If you have any questions, you can ask.
Yeah, I'm here, so you can ask.
He'll be there for some time.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. with us, and thank you for giving your insight on selling in emerging market, which is very important for product leaders to understand the market dynamics. Thank you very much. I request Pinkesh to come on and hand over a token of appreciation.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Thank you. It's only a pleasure to host somebody from Inmobi, who's a gardening company, an amazing product success story that we all have heard from India. More importantly, it's amazing that we have somebody who's in the field, as a practitioner. A lot of this felt like around the world in 80 days. It seemed like around the world in less than 80 minutes. I think we've learned a lot. So big round of applause again. I also want to learn a little bit of the sales that now that you've inspired us and have something for your wife who let you come here. I think we have some coffee and tea, so enjoy. This will be here. It will be here for some time, so engage. I also want to quickly recognize a new batch that just started their orientation today. I think some of them are here. You can raise your hands. There's the product management batch, the 9th batch that just started today. So we welcome all of you to the campus as well. And obviously the EMBA batch, all of the guys who are without a batch. It's essentially the EMBA guys. So hang out and network with them as well. Thanks.